I've suffered two broken hoses so far this winter while the season is almost over. I've kind of called it done with the area. We decided to clear cut. Well, there is more to be done, but that will have to wait to another year for different reasons. So this is back in time. I still need to clean up a little along some roads, but here I searched for the day before it had. I was blaming it on the hills and that the machine was leaning because it started complaining about low oil, hydraulic oil. But towards the end of the day, it complained even on flat ground. So I realized something was leaking, so needed to start investigating. But that had to wait until the next day. So while feeding back and forth, quickly I could start seeing oil seeping out from this hose here, and I've replaced one of these before. The one next to it actually looks like it's in even worse condition, but the one I'm removing was the one I could confirm was leaking, and I had a spare one because last winter I had one break and bought a spare then also, so I had one around. I knew that, so I decided to fix it right away since I had the parts. But access is a little tricky. Both the inner coupling and this outer coupling on the motor can be a little tricky, but was eventually able to undo both ends, and with them both undone there is this clamp up here that's held in place with an Allen head bolt. I usually just tap out from one of my sockets with Allen keys and use a 10 millimeter wrench on that. I held it down the like hex bit while I first started on doing it. Once it was a lot looser, I could just start unbolting it. I left the bolt in place. I never did it fully, just enough to be able to lift the clamp up enough to remove the hose. And with everything kind of loosened up, I also had to remove one smaller hose here. That's a leak hose, return hose for any leak oil within the motor that was in the way for being able to undo the inner coupling. But it wasn't too hard. You could get the hose undone, and you can see how bad the next hose is, but it's not leaking yet. So when I wrench on the field, I prefer to just do the minimal. I think this one has been spraying a bit of oil up against the hydraulic package also. So it was kind of oily everywhere. It was a little hard to decide where to actually start looking. Turned out that the pipe this fits onto was kind of not lining up properly, so, and being by myself here, I started playing around with all the big wrenches I had brought out and kind of building up scaffolding to kind of push up the pipe a tiny bit to be able to align the threads, and eventually with enough big tools jammed in there it was lining up a lot better, so I could get it down there and get the threads started by hand. So with that end in place, I also replaced the O-ring in there. That might not have been covered super well, but these are O-ring sealed couplings in the harvester head, so new O-rings on everything I take apart. And it was a bit of a struggle bending this one in. I've cut away a lot of time that I spent trying to align this luggage strap, feeding it down and helping to pull and kind of bend it down where it was going. I was a little bit worried I had disrupted the O-ring, but so I was a little worried when I first started up the machine that I would have to undo this again, because it was a bit of a struggle to get it in place, but eventually had it on there, started, but it was kind of putting pressure on the coupling, so had to quite quickly start using the tool. I don't really like that, but I prefer to be able to thread it in further by hand, but I was making sure to take it gentle at first until it was tightened almost all the way up, and when things started to get where they were supposed to be, it's time to tighten things up. Tighten back up the clamp and install that leak hose also, and I put the cover back on, and then it was time to start and see if it worked. I will cover the next hose that started leaking a couple of days later also in the video, but this was not on the same day. I had a couple of days of operation, some 20 hours on the machine I think between them. So it was not that I replaced the wrong hose here, that the leak was at the other hose that is replaced next. So checked that it didn't seem to leak after hydraulic pressure was put back. I had also noticed there's tend to be some buildup of sawdust and stuff kind of packing up under the cylinders that clamp the feed rollers closed, and try to clean that up every now and then. And by the time I had this fixed, my dad had been working a little and it was time for lunch today, so the second hose that caused issues, I found a leak in the evening and started investigating where it was. Took the big cover off for a little bit better access, and here I had fade in the transitions because the newer laptop can handle the fades, and I can still watch the preview of the video before rendering it. That could not be done on my old stationary one. Found out it was one of the hoses that goes to one of the tilt cylinders. They looked really bad. I actually had bought the extra pair and had planned to replace them as a precaution, but never got around to it, so I had spare parts luckily. Need to get the oil tank up a little. A luggage strap to help pull the hoses out of the way to have access to remove that top cover plate. And luckily it was the easier access hose here that seemed to be leaking, and I should have replaced both of them, but branching out in the field you go a little lazy and you do as little as possible, and so and it was a little tricky getting things to line up because the cylinder kind of wanted to twist a little on you, so but introduced some breaker bars to shove in there and help things line up properly, so it could be threaded on by hand to start with. I also replaced it, has the O-ring seals, they were replaced. Once it was started by hand, it was I could tighten it up almost all the way. I made sure I had the other end in place before doing the final tightening up. Got a little question myself how I had routed the hose and realized one of those small things here. I'm not sure if it's, I think it's some wiring was kind of in between them, so rerouted the hose for I think the correct way. It doesn't seem to pinch anything, at least now. And here I had to remove some cover for one of those test ports. And it's important to remember to put the top plate here in place. I do not want to admit how many times I've buttoned things up just to realize that one needed to go in place before you drop the oil tank back down and put the big cover back in place. So, and to be honest, I had dropped the oil tank this time also and started tightening that up, and I realized I did the same mistake I've done a couple of times before. But this went quite easily, so it could be fixed in an hour or so. And we topped off the oil for the saw bar. And apart from the forwarder complaining about high hydraulic oil temp, it's some electrical fault. It's nothing wrong, the oil temp is good. If you feel the tank and nothing seems to run hot, and it goes back down a few seconds later after it started beeping, so something is wrong there, and the slow dealing knives. Other than that, it's been just these two broken hoses so far this winter, and I'm about ready to call it. I have a little more I'm gonna clean up along a road. I'm not gonna do any more real clear cutting or anything this season. So hopefully that's all the issues I will have this winter. So that's good. What do you like the fancy transitions? Please comment if I should bother doing fancy fading transitions, or even look at doing something even fancier. You can do cool little squares that move around and gives you kind of a transition into the next segment. So if you made it this far in the video, into the video, and actually viewed it, please leave a comment. Thank you.